In stage 3 of the Violence Prevention Initiative, we had another round of interviews. And this round, you can see in the project for Community A, the first round of interviews were already imported, and now we have our second round of interviews also imported. Some of these were conducted by different researchers on the team, but they were the same people as were interviewed in the very first round. At this point, we were interested in investigating what counts as learning in the projects where communities were trying to collect information and adjust based on lessons learned. So in our coding structure, we had a new series of nodes around the community issues that participants were sensitized to and that may have been sensitized to ignore. In other words, it happens so frequently that sometimes people don't see that it's going on. This was a difficult area to code and moved a little bit beyond our initial descriptive coding structure. So we have several issues that came up as people were discussing their communities. And in addition to coding to these areas like teen pregnancy and overrepresentation of certain populations in the criminal justice system, we also had an area of the coding structure where we had awareness of the issue and that people were aware of it, but as a result of being aware, actually ignored it. So in other words, things that were normalized and then sometimes overlooked. And the reason we created these coding structures with these main nodes and then awareness and lack thereof is that when somebody mentioned something, we would code it both places, right? To the node that pertained in this part of the structure, as well as to the node that might have pertained in this part of the structure. And as a result of that, we were able to run a query. So here's an example of the result of a query where we have awareness and lack thereof by those issues. Once again, we have to be careful about these numbers, but by double-clicking on a cell, you can get in to see the data. So that was the main purpose of this portion of the coding structure. And we coded as a team 2 sources using these nodes and then piloted one of these matrices. And then we duplicated the project 4 times, and the project got the name of the coder and the date as part of the title so that when they were collected back again, we know whose project it was. And each coder had 8 to 10 interviews that were imported into their project that they coded. We coded using these new nodes that we created, as well as the descriptive nodes that we created earlier. Also, as we did in our prior stage, we had an area of the coding structure where researchers could create their own nodes if something new came up. And we also had memos where people could add notes and we could collect those to look at issues across the researchers. And you can review the video in stage 2 if you'd like a refresher of how we did that. In phase 10, we merged the project together so that we had all the sources with all the coding. And then we reviewed the nodes that we created to code for this round. As a result of that conversation, we realized that a lot of things were going on around learning and what counts as learning. So even though we were pleased with how these new nodes played out, we created another part of the coding structure as part of our process. And that part of the coding structure had to do with learning. And we created 3 main subnodes: characteristics of learning, definitions of learning, and outcomes of learning, where we could code additional material. We also had this learning miscellaneous area where we could put something that was about this conceptualization of learning, but we didn't know where it went. This was a long team meeting where we really hashed out a lot of issues that we were seeing in the field, some of which were fairly subtle. We agreed that we wanted to create these nodes and code some more data, but we also felt we better log in why we were making this adjustment. So we created a memo, and this memo was called Rationale for Focus on Learning from Different Perspectives. So if we open this, we see how we talked through that in our team meeting and why we wanted to create this new coding structure. This is important because later we needed to articulate to the funder why we made the shift and what happened as we were in that meeting. It's amazing how you could forget these things if you don't write them down when they happen. Back in our coding structure, we decided to then apply these nodes about learning. Because we did most of this work together, we were able to, in our long meeting, construct this and then write up our second report. And so the second report was primarily around these two areas of the coding structure: the community issues and what people were aware of and what they were ignoring, as well as learning and what counts as learning or how it's defined.